Awesome, awesome. So, welcome everybody again to our next workshop. Here we have George DeLorean with us. He is a music industry professional. He's been making some money, some pretty good money for a bit of time, making music in the video game industry. And so what George will be going over is how he specifically tapped into this market, how he networks, and how he actually manages conversations and relationships with the various game developers and the companies that ultimately at the end of the day need music made. There's so many different ways that you can make money in this music industry. It's not limited to just simply being the next Tiesto or DJing. You have a variety of different formats that ultimately need this creative talent. So if you're a music producer sitting at home wondering, hey, how can I make music in this industry? When's my next break? Realize that so long as you have the ability to create music, you're actually not as far off as you may think. Without further ado, let's go ahead and give it up for George. And George, tell us a little bit about your experience in music production and then how you ended up in this particular field.
For sure. So Chris, thank you for having me here, putting this together. As you said, I'm George DeLorean. I've been producing for probably about 10 years at this point. And I've been producing music for games and film since about 2015. The way I got started doing that was sort of by accident. I stumbled into it, and just kind of to drive the point home, like I'm a nobody. Like, so if I can make money doing this, I think anyone can if they know where to look, right? So in Austin, there is this wrestling league called PWR, Party World Wrestling. They've been running around for I think since like 2013, 2014. They run out of a brewery up there. What's the brewery called? Damn, I can't remember. Fourth Tap. Fourth Tap is the name. So they were having a 80s synthwave themed wrestling match, right? Or whole like performance around it. And they came up with this idea of creating a cassette with like, some tracks to commemorate the event. And they reached out to me because some of my friends were in. They're like, "Hey, George, would you like to make some music for this?" And I said, "Sure." So a friend of mine, Adam Williams, and I wrote a track, very like a synthwavy version of something like "Eye of the Tiger," that kind of just like montage music. So wrote it, and they played it over the sound system at this event. And this event draws maybe like 2,500 people on average. So a guy that works with that event heard the music, and he reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I'm working on a video game." I was like, "All right, that's cool. Do you want to make music for it?" Not really, because I've heard so many people do that, right? They want to make video games, they want to, whatever. But then he said, "I have money." Oh, okay. Let's talk. What do you need? So he gave me the scope of the game, and basically his goal was to make a demo for this game that he was working on, and it had to be, it was they call it a vertical slice, right? So a little vertical slice. It's one level, your menu, the level, a boss, victory screen. Give people a taste of what the whole game would be like, right? So we figured out how many songs that needed to be, and he wanted me to do the sound effects as well. And so for me, let's take a step back. Prior to that wrestling thing, like I never really shared my music with anyone. Like as long as I'd been producing, I kept it to myself, and I never wanted to put myself out there. And my friend Adam, ever since I've known him, he's just encouraged me and inspired me to put myself out there, right? Like nothing's ever going to be perfect. They say that art is never finished. It's just abandoned. So, and I think it's something all artists can relate to, right? You, in your mind, you're like, man, this could be better, this could be better. But the point is, putting yourself out there was key, right? So I did that. That opened up doors for me. So yeah, he wanted to do this vertical slice. And the key thing for this demo that he wanted to do, there was definitely an objective. We had a deadline to meet, and the goal was to get into South by Southwest. They have, for the South by Southwest gaming, they have a certain number of spots available for up and coming developers and game producers. And so you submit the game to a panel. They give you a yay or a nay, and it's paid for, right? They give you the passes, they give you the booth, they give you media attention, all that stuff. So we got to work. And in about a month and a half, we were able to produce a demo. For the name of the game is Tonight We Write. And we ended up winning, right? It was like, what the hell? So we went to South by Southwest, and from there, the rest was history for us and for myself, because we made a lot of connections through there with other developers, other people in the industry. We ended up getting courted by several publishers as well, and we ended up going with New Blood Interactive as our publisher for the game. Check them out. They make a lot of really neat games that are just retro inspired. But the other thing to mention too, so Ted was not a stranger to the game industry. He's actually been working in games, I think he said like 17 years or something like that. He's worked for Nintendo. He's worked for whatever that company was that did like the Metroid Prime game, Retro Studios. I think it was Retro Studio. He did that. He's worked for several different companies. So he kind of knew from a game lead perspective of what to put in the game and make it pop. And for me, one of my biggest inspirations as far as music growing up was video game music. So it was just such a cool opportunity to like give back to that, or just be involved in that. Like I never thought I would ever be doing that. Which, side note, that's how I got into electronic music, was through video game music. Because growing up, it was just classical and jazz is what my parents listened to, and then I'd listen to video game music and I'd leave it on pause and it would just blips and bloops and everything. And I remember the first time hearing techno, I'd be like, hey, this is good stuff. Sounds like video games. But so that was my big break, if you will, right? And the key lesson there is for me was definitely putting myself out there. So if you don't put yourself out there as an artist, no one's ever going to discover you. No one's ever going to take a chance on you. Like no one knows what you do, right? So put yourself out there. That being said, be sure that how you put yourself out there, you present yourself professionally at all times in terms of media interaction, and you take yourself a little bit seriously. Not to say that you need to have everything figured out, right? I'm not saying you have to have like a professional logo and like professional website and all that, but at the very least, whatever people interact with, make sure it's kind of cohesive, just easier to find. So from that experience, I ended up getting making connections, right? A lot of word of mouth, because my specialty at that time in terms of music was this like super electro inspired synthwave for the compositions that I do. And this was before like the big synthwave boom that kind of happened, and like Stranger Things and all that. So people would come to me and be like, hey, I want synthwave in my game. Can you make it happen? Okay, cool. So that was what I ended up getting pigeonholed into doing.
So out of a point of observation, it seems that you're working in the video game industry, creating music, but then you're specifically in a very specific type of niche.
Yes, indie games.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's both a combination of indie games, but as well as even a certain type of genre of music that they're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. And some of my colleagues that are also game producers, I don't know that if you ask them if they produce like one style, they would say the same thing. But like thinking about the different soundtracks, like they definitely have a very distinct style, right?
Right.
And I think in indie games that carries a lot more weight, having character to your music and having a very distinct sound, than being able to generically produce like, oh, here's a song that sounds generically classical, or here's something that sounds generically tropical, right?
Okay.
It's all about having that character.
So it sounds like there's something to be said about having a very specific type of style, not only if, let's say, you're an aspiring DJ or a musician that wants to be on a big stage, but even in this very specific type of realm, having a style of your own across different platforms, or I should say across different projects.
Yep.
Would you say that has helped you, I guess, gain some level of, reputation amongst video game developers?
Absolutely. and even for me as an artist, because prior to that, like I'm super grateful for Ted having asked me to be on this project, because I'd never produced a comprehensive piece of work prior to that. As much as I'd been producing, as many tracks as I've like produced and dabbled in and never shared with anyone, it was never anything cohesive. You know what I mean? And doing something cohesive and telling a story and all that completely changes the game, rather than just like, I'm just going to sit here and write a track. I'm done. Going to make something else, right? So you have to think thematically. You have to think how, you know, the songs tie together, what kind of emotions you're going to portray, right? Movements, things of that nature.
I see. So creating video game music isn't as simple as just maybe creating a 30-second loop, but it sounds like there's a lot of methodical process that goes into it on a compositional level.
Yes. And I'd say the two things to keep in mind with video game music is the fact that it's going to be repetitive, right? Like the song is going to loop. And if you ever notice, like take one of your favorite pop songs and you could put it on loop and you'll probably get tired of it after like the fourth pass, right? So that's like listening to it for,
9 to 12 minutes.
Yeah, 9 to 12 minutes, exactly, right? You're listening to it 9 to 12 minutes, like, I'm tired of this, right? But with video game music, you're going to be listening to that song for possibly hours, right? Like if you're stuck on a level. So there's definitely, I think maybe the best way to describe it would be like thoughtful ambience, right? Like it's ambient in the sense that it's meant to be in the background, but it's meant to evoke emotions, and that's how I compose music for video games, and with emotions in mind first and foremost, and then with knowing that the mood and the emotion I want to portray in a specific piece. Then from there, I start choosing my composition, and then based on the composition, I choose how I want to loop the pieces. So it is different than regular production. It's not impossible to do. It's easy to learn. A good friend of mine, Hunter Pierce, he, I gave him some tips and stuff last summer on video game production music and and he's a phenomenal producer. Like before ever, talking to him, like he is an excellent producer, but he understood that there's a difference between producing, regular stuff and then producing for like trailers and for video games. And so,
right.
And now he's, making stuff for video games and for trailers, and he's making money doing it.
Very cool. And for those of you wondering a little bit more on the elaborate process of how composition takes place for these video games, in which we are going to be hearing for, you mentioned that this song or this music we're going to be hearing for hours, potentially hours on end. During the latter portion of this webinar, we will have George go over into his DAW and show us how he arranges and sets these pieces in a way that creates this level of cohesion that he's talking about.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so, resuming back to, I guess the very, very first project that you did, how was the very first project? I mean, how did that go? Was it as smooth as you're kind of retelling it out to be? What kind of roadblocks or obstacles did you come across?
Oh my goodness, so many. So not smooth at all, and it's still not out, which is a problem, in its, or a challenge in itself, right? So I mean, we've got a publisher, we've got the programmers, we've got art, everything, a lot of media attention in the indie game scene and things like that. But video games are hard work. They really are, and I think. God knows the number of people I've met in my life that's like, I'm going to make a video game. And it's like, all right, cool. Like it's not like as straightforward as just sitting down on a computer and then just programming and hoping, you make a game. Cause like you have to take into consideration the psychology of the game itself, right? The different types of loops within the game to keep people engaged, progression. People want to feel a sense of accomplishment. You want to tweak the game to be, challenging, but not so difficult that it frustrates people that like they just don't want to play it anymore, right? Like it's all there's a finesse there, and then of course you have to consider the art, and then like the demos and all that. So it's still we've been 6 months away from finishing the game for about a year and a half now.
Wow.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll be out soon, but we're still with the publisher, we're still producing. But my work majoritively on that game has been done, okay, right? Which is producing the soundtrack. And for that, a lot of the challenge uh, musically, man. I don't know. I don't know that I would say that there were challenges on this one for me as an artist because Ted has a very like good vision of like the aesthetic of the game that he wants, and like I have a good idea of like how I want it to sound, and so like we bounce ideas off of each other really well. And so because of that, like, hey, like here's this track I think would be a good inspiration for this, or blah blah, or here's the mood I want for this, and so we've been able to work really well together in that regard. Um, the um, the challenges that you would encounter, and this is just as an artist in general, and I've encountered these as well in other projects, is not setting expectations up front, right? And that's I think where a lot of artists go wrong is they get really excited, they got picked up for something. So first of all, is that even a right project for you? It may not be. Don't take the first project that comes your way just because it's there, because it could be something that you absolutely hate, or you don't want to work on, or they're not going to pay you, or whatever. The second is qualifying your clients, right, to make sure that you're able to work with them, which is a challenge, and making sure that you
Let's talk a little bit more about like qualifying the clients. So what do you exactly do? What do you mean by that?
are they serious, right? Like, are they serious about what they're doing? What's their vision? Do they have an idea of what they want to accomplish with the game? Do they have money? Which is key. I mean, the whole conversation here is making money, right?
Right.
So the key thing is, do they have money? And when I mean, um, we'll get to the point of like how much it costs to produce a soundtrack or whatever in a minute here. But like, I'm talking, I'm not talking like, hey, I'm gonna throw $50 your way and we'll call it a day kind of thing. Like, are they able to sustain it? And are they able to sustain the development of the game? Period. Right? Like, what's the plan for that? Um, uh, just also like moral character, right? Like it, you don't want to get involved in a project or with someone, especially with the indie game scene where personalities run rampant, right?
Right.
Like if somebody says something like that's just like awful, right? Like just really off color, like that's going to spread around and it'll be like an indie game user and like, oh, so and so's like saying this or whatever. Like, do you want to be associated with that, right? So you got to kind of um, get a gauge for that. So does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And so how do you, I guess, let's say if you're starting out, how could you potentially kind of make these types of gauge? Let's say that, you don't know enough about a company's reputation. You don't know enough about, especially if you're working on the indie scene, how can you go about by kind of doing some detective work and making sure that you're in the best possible starting point? Thank you guys so much for joining and tuning into our channel. You can find us and any of our 30-minute video excerpts for free on YouTube. You're also more than welcome to join us directly on our live stream. Visit our website at pantheonmusicacademy.com, subscribe with your email address, and you'll get notices the moment that we go live on stream. If you weren't able to catch any of our past presentations simply because you missed them or you just didn't have the time, no worries. For just the cost of a $5 cup of coffee a month, you'll be able to gain access to our entire video library. How cool is that? Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.